Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Marie McNeely, your host for the People Behind the Science podcast. Thank you very much for joining me today for episode 653 with our guest, Dr. Aruni Bhatnagar. Listeners, if you like this episode and you want to check out more stories from phenomenal people doing great science today, you can find more episodes of our show on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, or wherever else you like to get your podcast fix. And today, Aruni has some fantastic stories of his own to share with us. So get ready to meet another one of our remarkable people behind the science.
Every day, discoveries are made that will change our understanding of the world around us. Dr. Marie McNeely is here to bring you the brilliant minds who are making these discoveries so they can share their incredible stories and take you on an amazing journey. Welcome to People Behind the Science.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to People Behind the Science. Today, I am thrilled to be speaking with our guest scientist, Dr. Aruni Bhatnagar. So, Aruni, welcome to our show today. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you, Marie, and thank you for the invitation and having me on the show.
Well, we are excited to learn more about you and more about your work as we go through our conversation today. But let me start by telling our listeners a little bit about who you are and how you got to where you are today. So listeners, Aruni is the Smith and Lucille Gibson Professor of Medicine, Director of the Christina Lee Brown Envirome Institute, Director of the American Heart Association Tobacco Regulation and Addiction Center, and a distinguished university scholar at the University of Louisville. He was awarded his PhD in chemistry from the University of Kanpur in India, and he conducted postdoctoral research at the University of Texas Medical Branch at Galveston before joining the faculty there at the University of Louisville in 1998. Now, Aruni has received numerous awards and honors over the course of his career, including being named a Fellow of the American Heart Association in 2005. He's also received the President's Award for Outstanding Scholarship, Research, and Creative Activity from the University of Louisville, the Partner in Healthcare Award, the Outstanding Faculty Mentor of Graduate Students, and the Outstanding Mentor Award from the Conference of Southern Graduate Schools. And he was designated a Research Exemplar by Washington University in St. Louis. Now, today, Aruni, we are excited to get to know you, of course, as a scientist, but also as a person. So can you start by telling us what you like to do when you're not doing science?
Lots of things, and they kind of change with age, and that's what I've realized. When I was younger, most of the time I was not doing science, I was painting. I love to paint, and I did a lot of time spent sketching and painting, which I enjoy very much. And then lately, I've also spent a lot of time reading and writing. I sometimes write stuff, songs or poems, just to amuse myself. So I think that being creative and doing diverse things helps at least me grow to be a more sort of observant scientist.
Fantastic. Now, does the science ever inspire your creative side? Do you have songs about science or poems about science?
That's right. And so now I'm trying to put together, and this is sort of a series of lectures in which I try to tell the story of different things, for example, sleep and food and other things in terms of art.
Oh, cool.
We have some really, really fantastic paintings and artwork about sleep and sleeping people, what the mystery of sleep is, what sleep is as a scientific subject, and what sleep is as an artistic subject together. So those sort of stuff. So yes, I think that art and science can inform each other. I'm trying to weave the two things together in my own worldview.
Oh, I absolutely love it. And I love that you're able to go both ways, it sounds like. You know, the art inspires your science and perhaps your science inspires the art as well. And I think that two-way street is important for being innovative in science.
Right. And it is something that the observant part of science, right? So science is about observing things and being curious about what is around you. So as human beings, if we are observant about things around us, we cannot be aesthetically naive. We should be alert not only to the content of what is around us, but also its form and its aesthetic. I think if we just pay attention to one aspect of science, which is the actual material facts, sort of divorced of all aesthetics, we are not even looking at the whole phenomenon. And some of science is very beautiful. We have these electron micrographs and these fluoromicrographs, cells and mitochondria and filaments and how cells divide. And they're just beautiful to watch.
Oh, I love it. And I'd love to dive into some more of the details about your science. So, Aruni, how do you describe the work that you do to someone who's maybe not familiar with your research portfolio or your field?
That's always a hard thing, but mostly my interest has forever been on trying to understand how the heart and the blood vessels work and how they become diseased. That is the common thread in what I have been doing. My initial work was to understand how heart generates electrical activity, the heart beats, and each beat has to be one specific electrical impulse. So I've been studying the mechanisms of those impulses and how these are affected by different types of exposure and environmental conditions. So in order for us to understand and prevent heart disease.
Definitely. And I understand you're one of the pioneers who really helped create this field of environmental cardiology. So what was it like starting in this new research area that was pretty much untapped?
I think it's still starting in this area. The understanding from many years, a couple of centuries, has been that whenever you have heart disease, then there's something wrong with your heart, right? The blood vessels are clogged up, or your heart is becoming bigger and thinner. And we have focused all our energies in trying to mend the heart, so to speak. And that has been the domain of medicine for decades. What we have come to realize lately is it's not really the origin of the disease is not really in the heart itself, but the heart is the victim, or it is the outcome of these diverse environmental exposures like social conditions, lifestyle choices, environmental factors, exposure to air pollution, coordination with your day and night rhythms and cycles. All of these are the actual root causes of cardiology. And what we keep studying in the clinic is just the outcome of all of those exposures. So it was a difficult idea. Most people in cardiology do not worry about the environment. The only thing they worry about is, well, people should exercise and they should not smoke and they should eat well. But it's difficult to figure out what that actually means. We can tell our patients, you need to exercise more. And then they have to go back home and live in a space or an area where it is almost impossible to walk on the streets. There are no sidewalks. So how do we create social conditions that physicians are not left with an advice that nobody can follow? And the same thing with food. We say, oh, you need to eat well. But we don't know. Those people, if they go home, they have food deserts and there's no fresh food outlet in where they live. And so these are the key environmental factors that we need to be alert to, that we need to understand, and then we need to change in order for us to really decrease the burden of cardiovascular disease in our community, which incidentally remains the leading cause of death in the United States and everywhere else. And we cannot do this just by putting more stents and putting more people on statins. We have to look at the causes of heart disease. And I think that's the whole idea of environmental cardiology, is to look at causes beyond the clinic, beyond an individual's treatment and blood pressure and heart rate and other things, to figure out why heart disease arises in some people and in some communities.
Definitely. Well, Aruni, I think this is so important, the work that you're doing. And it sounds like you are just so passionate about it as well. And I love getting kind of a peek behind the curtain, if you will, about what motivates and inspires and makes scientists passionate in life. So do you have a favorite quote or saying, or just something that really motivates you in the work that you do?
It does. So when I was growing up, I was always told that it is something that we need to live for something larger than ourselves. And it is an important thing for us to do, that we could be concerned or preoccupied by the immediate conditions of our life and circumstance. But if we dedicate ourselves to a higher cause, it makes life more worth living. And I think that's born true. But what motivates me most is, if you see around, there is so much suffering and disease because of heart attacks, and we have hypertension, there's blindness, kidney failure, acute heart attacks. My father died of a heart attack when he was only 47 years old.
Oh, wow.
And we have had the disease in our family for generations. And at that time, we couldn't do anything at all. Now we have bypass and we have beta blockers and we have statins. But I believe that's not the answer. For us to be healthier, we need to be able to sort of stamp out the disease where it starts, at its very roots, so to speak.
Definitely. And I know one of the things that kind of helps scientists shape their journey and maybe encourage them as they go throughout their career are some of the people that you encounter and that you work with over the years. So when you think back, Aruni, are there particular people who you maybe met or even just looked up to historically who served as role models or mentors for you in your career?
So one of my first mentors, he was working on the nerve conduction, and he was trained in Cambridge, came back to India where I was doing my graduate studies. And he was a great influence in keeping us focused and tasked and committed to excellence. Anything which was shoddy and ill-conceived and not done well was not acceptable. So it had the very highest standards. So that motivated me a lot to go into this direction.
Absolutely. And I'd love to talk a little bit about your scientific beginnings, if we can start way back at the very beginning. Aruni, can you talk about your earliest memories of becoming interested in science, or what turned your attention to this area specifically in cardiology?
So I've been interested in medicine for a very long time, and that was my passion. And I always thought that I would go and practice medicine, which I never did. And I was in high school trying to figure out what I should do. Then I got selected through this really prestigious fellowship. It's called the National Science Talent Fellowship in India, which is only awarded to 100 students or so per year out of 500,000 students who appear in this test.
Oh, wow.
And then they would promote you to develop into a basic scientist. They fund your education from high school to PhD. Every summer, you can spend a couple of months in the most prestigious national labs in the country. So initially, I thought that that would be interesting. And I don't know whether I wanted to become a basic scientist and do a PhD. But then I spent time in these really prestigious labs in the country and interacted with some of the best scientists in India. And that sort of convinced me that really this is an important way of living. And I remember one time I was a graduate student and we had to have visitors from all over the world come and visit. And one of the visitors we had was actually the cousin of the Queen of England. He was the president of the Royal Society. His name was Lord Todd. And he came in and we had lunch with the graduate students. And he was asking me that what would I want to do? I said, I'm considering that I'm going to be doing medicine. And he said, no, first he asked me, why did you want to do medicine? I said, well, because you can help people, you can assuage suffering, and you can help the sick and the dying. And he said, well, there's a friend of mine who actually was not a physician, but when he was born, the life expectancy was 40 something. And when he died, it was 60. And he added his work led to a 20-year increase in the lifespan of an average person. Would you happen to know the name of this person? I said, no, sir, I don't. And he said, well, his name was Alexander Fleming. So by discovering penicillin, he added so much more to everyone's life rather than going to the clinic and attending to one case at a time. So never discount the power of science and basic research in helping us grow and to decrease the burden of disease in the world.
Oh, that is so cool. So then what prompted your decision to do a postdoctoral fellowship abroad?
When I was doing my work, and in India too, I was working on the electrical pathways in the heart, and I looked up at the various places where there would be the most productive and most energetic, concentrated group of scientists working in the area. I could identify University of Texas as one of those places. We have there an outstanding group of faculty all doing what we call cardiac electrophysiology. In fact, some of the basic developments of cardiac electrophysiology in that field came from that university. So I decided to apply there and said, that's where I want to go. And of course, it looked very nice and the pamphlets looked like there was an island paradise with palm trees and stuff.
Always sunny.
When I moved to Galveston, I figured out there were more oil rigs and palm trees in the area, but it looked good in the brochure.
Oh, that is phenomenal. Then what are some of these key moments that you think happened along your career path that took you from that trainee to now where you are today?
Well, a couple of things. One is that when I did my training in Galveston, I wanted to stay there. I was familiar with the area. The Galveston, Houston area has a lot to offer. We had many friends and family in the area, and that I was very comfortable there. And I wanted a tenured position in the university. And my chair said, no, you need to go somewhere else. Mm-hmm. It was funny. He said, it's like getting married again. So you are married and then things are not worked out and you're divorced and then you get married again, you get energized. And so if you move to a different place, you'll find a different footing and you would thank me for it. Although right now you are hating me for not giving you a permanent job here. And of course, I strongly disliked what he said that time. But then I moved and I came to Kentucky. And it's been a pivotal move. I think here, being in a different place, knowing a different set of people, that I could expand in ways which I cannot see that I could have ever done in Texas.
Oh, phenomenal. Yeah, I think continuing to build that scientific network, especially early in your career, is really helpful. But I know, as you alluded to, in science, as in Galveston, it's not all sunny days in tropical paradise. I know every scientist has these days where it just seems like everything's going wrong and things are falling apart. You have a lot of struggles, a lot of failures. So, Aruni, do you have a story or an example of one of these difficult times in your own career that you can share with us and kind of walk us through how you got through it?
There are a couple of stories. One, of course, was my wife. We were married. We were young at that time. And she got an anaphylactic shock because she took a penicillin and she was actually sensitive to penicillin. So she was in the hospital on the ventilator. And I was so distraught and shaking. My 1-year-old was at home with a maid and I'm trying to figure out what to do. My chair comes in and says, "Oh, you have to send your grant in the next week." I said, "I don't know how I would get to it. I'm just so shaken."
Mm-hmm.
He said, "Well, she's on the ventilator and resting peacefully. You can sit in the corner and write the grant." So that's sort of a harsh, tough love situation. But I had one time, a really bad patch. When I came to Galveston, I got my fellowship and the first grant I applied to, I was only 29 years old and I got my first NIH grant. I thought, oh, I'm great. I can do anything in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But after 5 years, when I sent the resubmission, it wasn't funded.
Oh, no.
And I went to my chair, Dr. Thompson, and said, "Dr. Thompson, my grant is not funded." He said, "Well, too bad. You can find something else to do." So I said, no, all my life, I wanted to pursue a career in science. And now that I cannot do science, I don't know what to do. So he looked right back at me and said, "Well, you are a smart guy. You could sell cars, whatever. And no place for you if you cannot get your own funding."
Mm-hmm.
And I was just so shaken. I went to my other chair in physiology and I said, "Dr. Royce, this is what the chair of biochemistry told me." So the chair of physiology says, "Well, don't be so disheartened. You don't have a terminal disease."
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't know what to do, but I did manage to get another faculty to support me for 2 years. And for 2 years, I didn't go anywhere. I didn't even cross the causeway from Galveston to Houston. I didn't venture. I just locked myself in the lab and did enough work to publish 2 papers as a single author each, and then rewrote my grant to get funded. And I've been funded since then.
It sounds like this tough love was key for you in these difficult times. I know that's not always the best approach for everybody, but it sounds like it worked in your specific case to kind of get you motivated, to get you back on track in your career.
I mean, I would never do anything to any of my trainees and students. I think there are other ways to motivate people. And I think we get motivated more by supporting people and by pointing out the pluses rather than simply, if you do not meet certain standard at a certain time, then we can uproot you and throw you out and do out from our institution.
Definitely. Well, I'm glad you didn't end up selling cars, Aruni. You've done some phenomenal work in science. And of course, you have so many successes to celebrate. So we'd love to talk about these as well. Do you have a favorite success story, whether it was a big win or just a smaller but particularly meaningful victory that you'd like to share?
One of the biggest successes in my career has been this project that we launched called the Green Heart Project. And what I had come to realize for a long time, as we talked before, that maybe the origins of heart disease are in the environment. So rather than doing all these large clinical trials that if we change whatever, this drug to that drug, would more people die from heart disease or whatever? Can we change an environmental factor that would alter the course of heart disease? And one of the things that I've been working on for a long time was the effects of air pollution on heart disease. Our work has shown that many of the people who die from exposure to air pollution die from heart disease. And so we were thinking about that. But what can we do? We can have people pass better regulations. We can complain about tailpipe emissions and the lax standards of emissions that we have in this country and other places. But is there something we can do positive to make a difference? So it occurred to me that, one thing we can do is to plant trees. And trees can remove air pollution. But putting up large trees may be very difficult because it takes 20, 30 years for trees to grow. And we will never be able to do a project like that. But when I was talking to some people, and they were very encouraging, particularly the people from the Nature Conservancy and other areas in the University of Louisville, is that we can find ways in which we can plant large trees. And if it's going to cost a lot, that'd be okay. We can raise money for that. So that was something that I had never considered possible, that we can go to an area and then we can plant a large number of large mature trees, maybe 8 to 10,000 of these trees in an area of 2 miles, and see what happens to the risk of heart disease in that community. We knew that this was going to be a $20, $30 million project, but actually the Nature Conservancy, the NIH, the university, and the city of Louisville. We all got together and made it happen. We raised enough money to plant these large trees and to do the clinical trial. So I think that would be a major success. But more generally, just to be able to have the privilege of working with this idea about how nature affects our health and to be able to afford the resources to understand and probe that is high privilege. I have just started a podcast. It's called Elements of Nature, How Natural Forces Affect Human Health. And you can find it on Spotify and Apple everywhere. It was just launched this week. And that allows me at least to talk to people who are really experts in this area, whether they're authors or scientists or journalists, about nature and its impact on health, and learn and understand more so that we can develop rigorous, hard evidence of this link that we can do something about it.
Well, that is a really exciting success. Congratulations both on this project, getting it off the ground. It sounds like it's quite promising, as well as launching your very own podcast. So we talked a little bit about your research in discussing this project, but I know you've got so many cool things going on in the lab. So do you have a favorite project or maybe something that you're most excited about that you're working on at the moment?
Of course, I'm excited about the podcast. Mm-hmm. But the other thing that I'm really excited about is we are looking at trees, and the trees actually emit different types of chemicals, right? And there is a lot of recent work showing that trees can emit chemicals that warn other trees of imminent danger, parasite attack, or stress. So the trees communicate with each other by secreting chemicals. So if one tree is attacked by one particular predator, then the tree sends out a signal to the next tree, and the next tree then upregulates its defense mechanism against that predator. So the trees have this communication, so which is great. But the trees also, when they emit different as chemicals, or they are also inhaled by humans. And we can inhale, I don't know if you've been to a forest, you can smell the fresh pine trees and pine forest. You can have this really energizing smell of the cedar. So we started a project in which we are looking at these, what we call volatile organic compounds or biologic VOCs. And these BVOCs are emitted by trees and inhaled by people. And we think that some of these chemicals that the trees emit and we inhale actually lower the risk of heart disease because by lowering your blood pressure, your heart rate, and your levels of anxiety and stress hormones. So we launched a whole project in trying to unravel this chemistry, what sort of chemicals are emitted by trees, how people are exposed to them, and what sort of metabolites are generated, and what is the biological activity, especially the cardiovascular effects of these tree-emitted chemicals, so that we can sort of eavesdrop into this conversation between trees and other trees and animals, including humans.
Oh, Aruni, this is absolutely fascinating. And I have to imagine, I don't know too much about trees, but they must emit a wide variety of different chemicals, and this must vary from tree to tree in terms of species. So how do you decide what chemicals might be interesting or what to look at first?
So you're right. I mean, trees have a lot of chemicals, and to date, we have gotten a lot of medicines that come from trees and plants, right? I mean, aspirin is one example. Mm-hmm. I think about 50-60% of our medicines are derived from plants or derivatives of plant material. But all we have thought so far is you have to take the fruit of the tree or the bark of the tree or something of the tree and you grind it up and then you eat it, and that's medicinal. What we have not paid attention to, that trees also emit gases. So these gases or volatile compounds can also have medicinal and bioactive effects of their own. So I think that opens up a whole new area of research. So one of the things that we do to figure out what is it that we are more likely to be exposed to is to take people to forests. So we took a group of volunteers to a forest here in Indiana, which is a sort of evergreen forest, a semi-deciduous evergreen forest. Then we took everybody to a place in Colorado to walk among the evergreens there. And then we collect urine samples from these people and blood samples from them and see what sort of chemicals people are exposed to in significant amounts from the trees. And then we try to decode them and understand what these chemicals are. So that sort of gives us a certain screening protocol to understand which chemicals to follow and which chemicals to identify.
Oh, that is really interesting, Aruni. This is a fascinating project, and I appreciate you sharing it with us today. And I can imagine that kind of delving into these entirely new areas of research involves a lot of work, a lot of reading. We love to encourage our listeners to maybe take a step back from the science that they're working on to read for fun. So I love to ask all of our guests that we have on the show if they can provide book recommendations. And these can be books related to science or completely separate from science. So do you have a favorite that you can add to our reading list, Aruni?
So one book I just finished reading last month, which I was like completely bowled over, was a book from Richard Powers called The Overstory. And I think he got the Pulitzer Award in 2018, got every award there is for this book. It's a masterpiece, and it's all about trees. It's about the relationship of human beings to trees, how trees are as much of a part of our lives as other people, how different people relate to trees differently. It's absolutely beautifully written book.
Well, excellent recommendation. You're not the first one to say very good things about it, so I'm going to have to pick it up myself and add it to my own reading list.
Yeah. The other book I really liked that I finished last year was Nutshell by, I think it's Ian McEwan. He's an English writer, and just the actual beauty of the writing, the simplicity and the restraint in that writing, and it's just such a beautiful story. It's a story of Hamlet told by the Hamlet who's still in his mother's womb, narrated by the embryo, and he is hearing his mother plot with his uncle to kill his father.
Interesting.
It's a really good book.
Well, we will add these recommendations to our reading list for our listeners to find there. And we've talked about some different aspects of your career, but I think one of the things we haven't touched on, and I know there's been a damper over the past few years with COVID, but as a scientist in general, you have a lot of opportunities to travel, to work with colleagues, of course, to visit forests and cool places. So for you, do you have a favorite place that you've been for science, Aruni, that you want to tell us about?
So we have a little club, and we call it a club because it's small people, about maybe 60, 70 people. They all work on this, something we call carbonyl metabolism. And we meet every 2 years, once in the United States and one in Europe. And we've been meeting together for the last 30 years. I used to go there when I was a graduate student, a postdoc, and I still go there. And they have these meetings in one of the most exotic places. For example, we had this meeting outside a little village outside Milan. And we stayed there for a week, and there were like maybe a few hundred people in the village. It was called Varallo. It's like 60 miles north of Milan in the mountains. And there's a little shrine there. And then at the 3-4 days of the meeting, there was a little grotto, and the local sort of abbey gave us a reception, and we went to the grotto. We had some wine and cheese. But then they took us to whatever 11th to 12th century church, and they sang for us. And it was just one of the most moving experiences to see that the entire town came to the church. And it's supposedly one of the old pilgrimage towns in Italy. But it was a very moving experience. So that, I think, is one of the high privileges to being a scientist, is to be able to see the world, interact with different types of people, and visit these really beautiful, memorable places.
Absolutely. And I think for a lot of us who have spent most of our lives, at least in the US, just thinking about trying to wrap your head around things that are 11th century, 12th century, these things that are hundreds and hundreds of years old is just amazing. So what was the coolest thing that you saw while you were there?
What really struck with me was the way people lived in the village. So we would go from our hotel to the conference room every day walk. We will see these old men would be outside sitting in their porch, and they would take the bicycle and get a bread and come back, and simple things. And I remember an old woman, she was going to the store, and on the way back, she had brought all these apples, and she was walking slowly. And the little kids came and stole apples from a basket.
Oh, no.
And I just stood there and watched her. I said, this is how we should be living. Not locked up in our cars. We really never talk to strangers. We never see something like that happen in the United States now.
Oh, absolutely. Well, this is a phenomenal story. It sounds like a wonderful trip. And I'm glad to hear that you've got this little club of colleagues that gets together over the years, because I think these people are what makes science so amazing. I know there's stereotypes out there in the media of what scientists are like and what life as a scientist is like. But I think so many of these examples, these stories I hear from people show a completely different picture. And I think the people are part of what makes it. I think so many scientists that I know are just amazing, funny, creative people. So do you have a story of your own, or maybe an example of a quirky lab tradition that really shows this human side of science that goes against a lot of the stereotypes that people have?
Just going back to your point about being a part of the family, we've gone to this meeting. There are people that we've worked with and known for a long time. We've known their children when they were like little kids. Now they've grown up. So like one of my colleagues, his daughter, when we first met her, was like, I don't know, 5 or 6 in one of the meetings. And now last time we went to a meeting, and this was in Barcelona, and she's now grown up. She's a very famous opera singer. And she came to meet us, and she wanted us to meet her boyfriend, who's she planning to marry. So it's like we're part of the family.
Oh, that's remarkable.
Isn't it? And our children have kept in touch with them and our friends all around us because we spend all these summers together, so many summers together. So that has a form of kinship and bonding. So people think the scientists are these weird people who actually have this sort of bad temper and they're like always pissed off or angry or something and paying attention. But actually scientists are very lively, funny people who really interact well with other people and actually have really good skills. They are the only group of people who are creative, yet well settled in their life. Mm-hmm. They can live ordinary lives, but they still could be very, very creative. And in our labs, the places that I've been to, we had all the traditions like every Friday, we'd all pack up and we go have lunch at the local Chinese lunch place, right? Or we will go out and play ball, or one of our professors had his own boat in Galveston, so you can go boating. So we'd go out boating with a professor like once a month into the water. I mean, he bought a boat and we didn't know how to operate it, but we were not daunted. We said, we are scientists, we can figure this out.
Right. How many degrees does it take? Yeah.
So we took his boat, we put it in the water, and we turned the engine on. We're waiting for the thing to start, and the boat wouldn't move anywhere. And we're like, what do we do? And we're looking around, and this other guy, boatsman, came around, and he was laughing at us. He said, no, there's a plug there to put the engine in the water, the back of the boat.
That makes sense.
So we felt so small that we thought we were these clever scientists, and we couldn't figure out how to get a boat in the water. But things like that we have made it a point, and I've still made it a point, to interact with all my colleagues and students and even my mentors on a human personal level. Because it's impossible to maintain a professional relationship without sort of having a human connection with people whom you spend so much time with and with whom you share the same passionate ideals. So there's a lot of room to bond because of shared interests and shared goals.
Absolutely. And I think not only sharing these ideas, these goals, you're with these people a lot. A lot of scientists spend long hours in the lab. So I think having that sense of community, having that great group of people to work with is really helpful in those situations as well. Yeah.
Some of graduate students, I have them over. We play all sorts of board games and such, have dinner nights together, and they come and hang out with our kids. We go and hang out with theirs. So I think it's important to know each other. It is actually a tradition that's gradually being lost in the United States, where we think of science as any other profession. I spent some time in the universities in Europe, particularly a place called Bern in Switzerland. It's a very, very old, very beautiful university. And you could see that every Friday the faculty would meet together in the coffee shops. And that in our university, even in universities in India, all of the UK and Ireland, the university professor or the headmaster would live on campus. And the teachers and the students would have dinner together as part of what they call the hall, dining hall, the mess. We used to call them the mess. So there was this sort of an abbey-like commitment to research and education that was different from any other profession. So that tradition continues in Europe. The faculty work together like a congregation or like parts of the same abbey, whereas here in the United States it's more of a profession, another job. But I think if you're going to do academic work, we really do need to interact with people in a different way than we just were doing professional stuff.
Definitely. I think having that community, having that tribe almost of people who are excited about the same thing and working towards the same goal can be really helpful, particularly when you're doing like you are, establishing this new field and really making great strides to answer some difficult questions in science. So, Aruni, I know as scientists, you're often held back by things like limited funding, staff, technology, even just feasibility of projects that you're interested in pursuing. So if we took away all of these barriers that normally hold you back, what is the one question that you would want to answer most?
The biggest question that I'm struggling with, that I'm trying to get the resources to do that, may never pan out, would to fully understand how nature impacts human health. And in the sense, not just disease. We live in a very disease-obsessed world, and we talk about preventing disease as if some terrible thing's going to happen. So we don't want to be passively preventing disease all the time. We want to be actively promoting health. And what are those natural course things that actually promote health? And in that sequence, the biggest mystery that I think we have not been able to understand, which I don't know whether even I have the competence to understand, is to solve the mystery and the riddle of aging. Why do people age? What is it that causes a gradual deterioration of function? And then how does the body keep time? Where is this clock that knows that I'm 16-year-old or 65-year-old? And who's keeping this count? I don't think we found anything or any organ anywhere that can tell us that, oh, now you're 65, not 68 or whatever, 32. And finding the answers to the problems of aging, I think, is one of the last great frontier in science that we still need to explore.
Absolutely. Well, this is definitely a big and very complex area. So we appreciate you dreaming big with us for this question on the show. And Aruni, you've shared a lot with us today, but we'd love to ask you for one more thing, and that is advice. So when you look back on your own life and your career, was there one piece of advice that someone gave you that really helped you that you can pay forward to our listeners out there?
So yes, and I keep telling all my students this, what I've been taught, not quite in so many ways and not so pithily, but what I tell my students is cultivate curiosity. And that's what I've been living with. We know that unexamined life is not worth living. So what we need to do is to examine life as we go through it awake and not asleep. So curiosity could be a double-edged sword. If you get too overly curious, the curiosity kills the cat, so to speak. But there are different paths that curiosity can take you into, and some of them could be dangerous. So you have to cultivate curiosity, ask the right question, and remain curious your entire life. One of the most striking examples of what a scientist is, when I was reading this biography of Leonardo da Vinci, and he spent 1 week in summer, again in Milan, trying to look at the tongue of a woodpecker, because the woodpecker bangs his head against the trees. So he was thinking that it should get a concussion.
Right.
But he thought that the tongue would buffer this impact. And he spent a week trying to catch a woodpecker and to look at the tongue and dissect many tongues of woodpecker. There was no reason for that. And there are people for generations in many cultures and centuries, nobody wondered about this question. So just to have that innate curiosity about nature and the capacity to learn its complex behavior is priceless. And if that could be inculcated in people to be interested and be curious about the world in things other than just yourself. What am I eating? What am I wearing? Who's my friends? Is somebody looking at me or judging me? No, not all of that. Just look at what the world outside you is and how beautiful and complex and worthy of attention it is.
That is fantastic. I love this directive. Listeners, cultivate curiosity, perhaps with a healthy dose of judgment.
Yes.
Well, that is a fantastic message to share with our listeners, Aruni. Is there any other last message or last piece of advice that you'd like to end our conversation on today?
Well, science is not an easy profession. It's difficult, it's challenging, but any culture, any society cannot progress, develop, or even maintain itself if it didn't have critical thinking people. We have, at least in the West and parts of the East, inherited this very precious tradition of learning and understanding, which we call the whole body of knowledge, which we call science. And I've been trying to attract people to come and be a part of this tradition. And I think it is very important that as people think about the world, as they think about what it is in the world, rather than demonizing scientists, that we think of science as a liberating sort of enriching enterprise. Especially in the past few months and the last couple of years, there's been a lot of talk back and forth, talk to the scientists, listen to the scientists, don't listen to the scientists. It's not about individuals. We talk about scientists, we lose the whole point. Science is not about individual opinions or behaviors, but a body of knowledge. It is a way of thinking in the world. So if we can cultivate that, I think we will, as a culture and as a country, be in great shape, particularly now that we are facing this great peril of climate change. We really do need to understand that science has meaning, and what these people are telling us is closer to the truth. It may not be the whole truth, but some truth. And we cannot ignore all of that for now. So if there was general awareness of this issue, particularly things like climate change, then we might have some hope that we can save ourselves as a species.
Absolutely. And I think understanding that science is this dynamic body of knowledge that's going to kind of grow and change as we learn more and as the conditions change, I think is so important to communicate and get that message out there.
And thank you for what you're doing. I mean, you put a human face to science, and that is very important to know. We scientists, like everybody, are human. We have our flaws, we have our biases, we have limitations. So even though we try to, science is a self-correcting process, people involved in it are just human. So if there are slips and mistakes, I think that's all part of the attempt to get to a more perfect understanding of the world.
Absolutely. Well said, Aruni. And thank you so much for sharing so much with us today. If our listeners are intrigued and they want to learn more about you and what you do, what is the best way for them to do so?
The website of the university has a lot of detail about my career and so on. I have, like I said, this podcast you can listen to. We have one episode every month that we are going to release. You can visit our website at the Envirome Institute at the University of Louisville or the Green Heart Project Louisville, and you can learn about all the type of research we do, the type of people we have, and type of educational programs that we support.
Fantastic. And can you tell us the name of your podcast one more time?
It is called Elements of Nature, How Natural Forces Affect Human Health.
Perfect. Well, listeners, definitely check out this podcast. Check out those website resources that Aruni mentioned. And Aruni, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Marie. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Well, we've enjoyed our conversation. Listeners, I hope you have as well. And we look forward to seeing you on our next episode of People Behind the Science.